Welcome to a very special edition of Three Blokes in the Pub, in which there's only two blokes. We didn't have Jason, unfortunately, because he had to run off. We're in Liverpool at the moment. We're down by the Liver buildings, and I'm here with Mike Galsworthy from Scientists for EU. Can you tell me a bit about yourself and about Scientists for EU?
And also now NHS against Brexit. So I started Scientists for EU back in May 2015, immediately after David Cameron won the general election, and I realised there was going to be a referendum on. And as a scientist in science policy, I thought, right, this could screw UK science big time if we voted to leave. And so I set up a campaign then. Then later on, during the referendum debate, I spun out Healthier in the EU, which we've now just rebranded to NHS Against Brexit, because my background, as well as science policy, is health services research. So I do science, NHS, health, medicine, that bundle.
So how is leaving the EU, whether we get a deal or no deal or whatever's going to happen, how does that affect you? How does it affect your industry? How does it affect innovation in the United Kingdom?
Right. Science is one of the most international disciplines that there are. And on the EU level, we've been particularly good at science at moving people back and forth and co-sponsoring big projects together that have real additional value on top of domestic-only research. So international research has about 40% more impact than does domestic-only research.
Right.
And so when you think about getting 28 countries together where they all pay into a pot and then have shared regulations and then have shared policy, it really puts the booster rockets on all of that. So in the world, there are three big science entities: the EU, the US, and China.
Yeah.
And the EU is number one out of those three. It's number one in terms of number of scientists working, and incidentally, the gap with the US is growing. It's number one in terms of research output, and the gap with the US is growing. And also, in terms of high-value output, so the top 10% of papers, the EU has now overtaken the US. And this is because science is becoming more multinational. 60% of UK papers are now in collaboration with other countries. And in 2013, a report for our government said this is why the UK is now number one in terms of bang for buck ahead of the US, because we do more multinational and international stuff. We get more value out of what we put in.
Yeah.
So, a lot of that is driven by our place in the EU, where we do all that big team stuff. So once you start wrecking that, you hurt a lot.
So what do you think that the, when we talk about the consequences to us leaving the EU without a deal or with a deal, like there's Horizon 2020, which is, can you tell me a bit more about that? Because that's a group of nations getting together and scientists from different nations.
Yeah.
How does that work?
So, Horizon 2020 is the name of the EU science programme that runs from 2014 to 2020. It's a 7-year programme. Before it was FP7, a 7-year programme. Before that, FP6, and going back like that.
Right.
And the funding for the EU science programme has absolutely shot up in recent years because everyone knows it's a winner. Whereas UK national funding has been stagnant since about 2010 and before. So the EU science programme, called Horizon 2020, has various funding streams. The biggest one of those is the ERC grants, which are awards for exceptional individuals from all over the world to come and work anywhere in the EU.
Where's that come from?
European Research Council, started 2007. One of the major intellectual driving forces behind it was the UK. And it was saying, like, if you want to do exceptional science, you need to get grants of $1 million to $1.5 million and give them to individuals to just put together a team and do what they want to do. And this needs to be judged by other scientists, like the world's best scientists. So they've got a council of 22 people, top European scientists.
So not the Daily Mail, that's what you're saying?
So not the Daily Mail. It's like the best scientists in Europe judging the most creative ideas from around the world and making them stick in Europe and Forge Labs there. our universities collect these like gold stars, the UK does the best in these. So then you've got those individual grants, right, for exceptional research. But then there's the real meat and veg of Horizon 2020, which is the multinational collaborations. So it's not just two countries working together like any two countries can. You're talking about 10 countries or 12 countries or 14 countries, sometimes even as much as 20, all getting together and forming a structure. And why they can do that is because all of the EU member states and then a few other countries besides chip into the pot.
Yeah.
So if you want to do a collaboration of 10 countries, you don't have to say, well, I've got my funding, do you have yours? Do you have yours? Do you have yours? Because that falls through. You just say, right, let's put together a plan and apply to that single point of funding, and if we get it, we can roll. And that's how the EU completely outcompetes the US at the moment, that massive scale projects.
Do we get money from Japan? Do we get money from the US? Do we get money from any of the advanced economies around the world ploughed into Europe to do this research, or is this European generated fund and a European generated scheme?
The countries that pay into the pot at the beginning
are
all of the EU countries. There are associated countries which then pay into the science scheme, and then any other countries around the world that want to participate can pay their own way from outside. And that's the danger of where we might go in a no-deal Brexit.
Where is the UK going to be left in the event of a no-deal Brexit? Because at the moment it looks like no deal or no Brexit. They're the two options. So let's say we go for a no deal. Where's the UK going to be left in terms of scientific research? I mean, medical research. I mean...
Yeah, it covers a lot. So the way things are so far is that the withdrawal agreement that was agreed in December 2017 says we will pay into the EU budget until 2020. And we'll keep with free movement until then, follow the European Court of Justice until then. And part of the rights that come with, continuing to honour until 2020 the European budget is that we get to play in the EU science programme until that time. Like full members, no problem whatsoever. However, if we pull the plug on that agreement and say we're not going to pay our 39 billion because what do we get for nothing, but then immediately we will only be able to access the EU science programme as a third country, like America does, or Japan does, or China does,
or Mauritania.
Exactly. That was the next example I was going to give. So that means that there are certain funding lines that we don't get access to. And those funding lines, we did a calculation, add up to 45% of the funding that we get at the moment. And then on top of that, if we want to coordinate some of those multinational projects that I was telling you about, there are very likely to be problems there as well.
But how does this affect the man in the street? I mean, who isn't a scientist, doesn't have a degree in science and doesn't really know much about innovation in this country? I mean, they go, let's say this guy on the street, he works in a factory and goes home, and how will it affect his life that we're not part of the EU anymore and not part of any of these schemes like Erasmus or Horizon 2020?
Well, everyone cares about their communities, and everyone cares about jobs in their communities, and everyone cares about opportunities for their kids. And one of the major drivers of any economy is science and technology. There was an analysis done in the US that showed that since World War II, about half of their growth, their economic growth, was down to investment in science and technology and innovation. It's a real driver. There was a recent analysis done comparatively for Europe, and I think in recent years it was 2/3. So this is in the growth. It's not turning handles on what you regularly produce. This is if you really want to grow something, that's what you invest in. And our universities are regularly engaged in spinouts. Oxford University last year just had its 150th spinout. One of the companies that it spun out, Oxford Nanopore, is now worth a cool $1 billion.
What's the spinout? What is that?
So that's when you've got an idea that's cooked up in a university and people say this is commercializable. Let's set up a company to do that. And usually they set up a company near the university because they still want to have links with the university and all the students and all the knowledge and all the equipment. But it's not just the spinning out into the local community. It's also if ideas bubble up in the local community, and they want to work with scientists, or they want to get networked up with the university and then with other countries, then the university really helps them with that. And in fact, the Horizon 2020 program took a step from the previous program in saying that for a lot of these grants, we're not going to let you get them unless you're working with small innovative businesses. And then
so
that
small
way,
businesses in the UK are benefiting from this funding that's coming from Horizon 2020.
Yes.
And the EU.
Yes, because they get teamed up with the university and university teams, and there's even a funding line within the Horizon 2020 program called the SME instrument.
Yeah.
So small and medium-sized enterprise instrument, and that's one of the funding lines that we would lose in a no-deal Brexit. But that's just for businesses who have innovative ideas.
Yeah.
But more important to me is how universities and small businesses work together to generate those Silicon Valley effects around universities in those areas that need stimulation for their jobs. And then when you get those small businesses growing, it's not just the tech people who get hired or the scientists who get hired. When a small business is growing, you need people to build the buildings that they're in, the painter decorators, you need the security guards there, you need the cleaners there, you need local hospitality around it, or the taxis and the restaurants and the accommodation, because business just brings in that thriving feeling around.
Business, doesn't it?
Business brings business, there we go.
And so you've got this, this isn't like the trickle-down effect, is it? Which has been proven to be invalid, this idea that we give rich people less tax, and so they spend more in their local community, and we've not really seen that.
Yeah.
But this is reality, isn't it? This is something where there is an investment in a particular area in the UK from the EU, and you're seeing tangible benefits, not just for the people who are involved in the research, but for small to medium business enterprises around the area. And
it's all about small businesses. They make up the employment for 2/3 of our economy, and when economies are on the rebound, it's always those small businesses that are growing first. They add the life, they add the variety. And like you say, in terms of trickle down, if you're cutting money for rich individuals or big rich companies,
they're just going to spend it on yachts and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You don't get anything back from that. But when you're putting it into the hard-working man and woman that has built their own company from their own sweat and blood, and they're spending their last pennies on employing people, then tax breaks and investments make a massive difference to their viability.
And this is something that the EU has been pushing for a long time now. It's always become
not that long. This really kicked in 2014, so they really stepped up in 2014. It's been working really well. Before then, everyone had been saying, how do you get academia and business to work better together? This has gone back in the UK since 1980, where people were starting to say, well, let's try and make these little set-up areas where you co-locate universities and businesses. And they co-locate, they work alongside each other, and nothing happens. Whereas the EU said, right, Horizon 2020, we're going to take a shift. We're going to tell universities, you're not getting this money until you bring small businesses into your team. And that was a game changer.
So that took the people down from their ivory towers, if you forgive me using that term.
Yeah, as a scientist, I always resent that, but I'll let it fly.
Down to the local community and being able to benefit the local communities in the UK. Now, can we just talk a little...
And we need more of that. And we need more of that with open data and using open data. And we need more of that with our postdocs and universities. You've got people trained up looking for jobs. If their grants don't come through, give them grants to work with local communities to take advantage of the data that farmers are collecting or fishermen are collecting or the local councils are collecting. Weave it all in.
Can I ask, before you say 2014 was when it really kicked off, what was innovation funding like from the British government, from our own sources of...
It's always been a bit crap and bureaucratic. In fact...
what, you mean lots of red tape?
Yep. And an example is when iPhone were coming out with all their touch screens and stuff, that had already been done by a British company years ago. But it had problems getting repeat funding from the UK government, even though its projects were successful. And so then missed out. And then it was an American company that got in with Apple and actually got all those contracts.
Was it a British company that invented touchscreen?
Yeah, and it had extra features as well, like different pressures and rolling and that kind of stuff.
This is so frustrating.
They were really into it, and basically it lost out because our national funding mechanisms just jammed up the whole system and was so bureaucratic that it killed it off.
Yeah, something that's really annoyed me for a long time is like until the Marvel comic book universe came along, the most successful franchises in America were, in the movie history, were Harry Potter, it's a British book, Lord of the Rings, a British book, and James Bond.
Yeah.
They were the 3 biggest franchises in Hollywood, and they were all British. Yeah. And like you say, obviously we invented it, but then we sort of gave it away to the rest of the world for a song because there was no investment in making those movies ourselves.
Yeah, we are innovators. When it comes to music, when it comes to culture and stories, when it comes to science and tech and innovation, we are a country of innovators. And so it bothers me when a lot of Brexiteers say, if we're such innovators then we don't need the EU, do we? It's like, well, if you recognise that the British people are innovators and scientists and top creators, why don't you listen to them when taking a decision with something like Brexit? Because 90% of the science community were against this because we are the best in the world for science, so we know what works for us.
Yeah.
It's like saying, if you're saying, we don't need the EU because we did science before the EU. Well, we did science before the invention of the computer. So what are you saying now, that we should ditch all of our computers and go back to all having powdered wigs and pencils and rulers and do it that way? Because we used to be successful like that.
I think a lot of people talk about that.
And technologies change. Computers add a level of advancement. They are a technology. The EU adds a level of advancement and is a technology, because nowhere else in the world did you actually have all of these countries, over 24 countries, pooling their resources together in order to do multinational collaborations. That's why the EU has been rocketing ahead recently, with us on the top, and now we've just been pulled out of the driving seat, thrown by the roadside. And what is that? It's frustrating. It's really frustrating. Lots of people in science are really frustrated by this.
I find that this is quite similar to this whole thing of older people. I'm not trying to get ageist here, because I get a lot of criticism for being ageist. There's a lot of people who are writing on my Facebook wall and on YouTube comments and on Twitter that we survived before the EU, we'll survive afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think they're harking back to some golden era that never existed, or their childhood.
Yeah.
When there weren't computers and there was no internet and there was no global communication in the way that we have today.
Well, I mean, never. If you think things were better before than they are now, just make sure you're not confusing your own life story with the nation. No, it's serious.
That's a good point, actually.
When I look back to my youth, and it was always
come on,
summer.
mate, you're still youthful.
Yeah, but it was always summer. You were having more fun. You didn't have the burdens of family. You could, mess around and do as you like. Oh yeah, I like it to go back to those days, but that's not how it is for our youth who are looking at having a lot of their rights ripped away, and they feel that very, very strongly.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I think there's always a thing of we are slightly obsessed with World War II. A lot of us were brought up with World War II stories, and
Dad's
so
army.
We're kind of forcing ourselves into a World War II reenactment now. Oh yeah, let's do the stockpiling. Let's do the Yabu sucks to Germany and everything on the continent. Let's bunker down. And I think there is a lot of that, us versus them mentality that harkens back to we want to be heroes like our fathers and grandfathers were heroes. And in fact, it wasn't Julie Hart, it was Katie Hopkins who was saying the same thing. She was saying, our parents' generations, they fought for us and they fought for our freedom. And I just want us to be able to do the same. It's kind of like, but they won your peace. So now the fight you're picking is, let's destroy the peace so that we can do something too. And you're actually undermining the work that was done.
Let's make change. I don't know, what do you want to change? I don't know, but it has to be changed.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of something that my ex once said, and she said, peace can't stay forever because people get bored and people get agitated. They've had too much peace, then what do? And it's very much like...
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Odin Crispin, a lot of these wealthy Brexiteers...
and they want something exciting to do.
Exactly. They're rich, they're bored shitless. What do you do? How do you make a name for yourself? How do you shake things up? Now, when you've got disaster capitalism rolling, they're insulated, they've got their pension sorted, they've got their wealth, they've got their property, they can dick around with the whole system. It's all a big casino for them. It's people at the bottom that don't know where to move. They go under the boot heel. But as far as these people on the top are concerned, it's like, I'm bored, everything's been so nice and sleepy and easy.
Where's so easy?
Where's my adventure? Everything around the world has been discovered. I can't go
why is the
off,
life
so
for
let's
my
just...
children okay? I want it to be disruptive. I want my children to suffer.
Well, I don't think they want their children to suffer. I just think that they think there must be something more. Surely I can't go through my whole life with everything being easy and sleepy. And so they want to hunt the big beast. They want to go on safari. They want to mix things up. They want the danger. And if they want to go and do that by themselves through whatever kinky adventure they want to go off on, fine, but not to our country where people are going to suffer.
Surely to anyone who has children, you don't want the adventure. You want your children to be
healthy. Their children are going to be fine,
safe,
but their children are going to be fine.
Oh, it's just everyone else's children.
Yeah, people that they never work with, people that they never meet, people whose suffering they've never felt, because they've always been insulated from that, because they've always gone through private school, and they've been in a completely different bubble.
Can we talk a little bit about the NHS? Because you've done, you did your PhD in health research, yeah?
No, I did my PhD in genetics and animal intelligence, human intelligence and animal intelligence, and then I went on to animal behaviour, and then I went on to medical informatics, and then I went on to science policy and health services research. I've done health services
7
research.
PhDs,
No, I've just moved around a lot during my postdoc years within life sciences.
Okay.
I've just wandered around doing the full range. But it's tended to go more and more towards policy and how you manage big science systems and big health systems.
So let's talk about big health systems then.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, what's going to happen to the NHS if we leave the EU without a deal?
Shafted, really shafted.
Short interview. Okay, let's go to that.
So the reasons are that Brexit, and particularly a hard Brexit, attacks the NHS from many angles simultaneously, when the NHS is already seriously weakened through years of austerity and bad management about staffing and funding the staffing.
We've got
nurse bursaries, all the rest.
108,000 vacancies.
Correct.
Is that right?
12,000 of those doctor vacancies, 42,000 of those nursing vacancies. Yes, those are the new stats. In fact, in a letter to Ben Bradshaw, Matt Hancock bragged that since 2010, the Tories have added 40,000 new jobs in the NHS. It's kind of like, we've got 108,000 vacancies, so at that rate, it's going to take you a good 23 years in order to fill those, let alone people that are naturally leaving, and let alone expanding capacity. They don't know what they're doing in terms of being able to staff the NHS. And so that is not a good position from which to start then encouraging EU nurses and doctors to be leaving our service. Okay, so like I said, Brexit attacks the NHS from various angles. A year ago to this month, so September 2017, colleagues and I wrote a paper in The Lancet, which is one of the world's leading medical journals, doing an analysis of what Brexit means for the NHS and UK healthcare. And so we looked at all of the different dimensions of the NHS and the UK healthcare frameworks that support it, from social care to research, cross-border healthcare agreements, recognition of qualifications, medicine supply, the lot, and broke that down by soft Brexit, hard Brexit, and what we said failed Brexit, which is now no deal Brexit.
No deal.
Yeah.
So basically, is there a difference between hard Brexit and no deal Brexit?
Yeah.
Because what's the difference in that?
Hard Brexit means coming out of the single market and coming out of the customs union. No deal Brexit means doing that without any agreements whatsoever.
With
so you've got
anyone
a
in the world.
So all your contracts are suddenly non-functional.
Yeah, all of them, everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
For every business.
And you have to scramble around sort of rebuilding your networks of contracts in order to do your basic business functions.
It's like the blue screen of death for our economy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's wiping all of your apps.
There's literally going to be nothing, is there? And we have to start rebuilding it.
Yeah, and then you start rebuilding it, but you start rebuilding it after you've already come out and everything is hanging. And the hit from that is really not good. So what we found with that paper was that all forms of Brexit hurt the NHS. You can identify a few pockets of where you could take advantage of it, but basically that sits within a sea of red, of warning lights.
Where could we take advantage of it? Can we get any glimmer of hope from all this? I mean,
so for example, one area would be in terms of setting your own stringent levels about qualifications and who you let in. So rather than doing that at a European level, you could be more strict on a national level.
Okay.
Another one would be with regulation in medical research and clinical trials and stem cell research. You could be a bit looser in the UK because you're not bound to Catholic Poland, so you can sort of unilaterally go and loosen a few things up. Now these are small relative to the hit you take from coming out all of the frameworks that support that, but as a scientist you have to kind of like list the whole lot of where you could get that. But overall, soft Brexit is a hit, hard Brexit is a bigger hit, and no deal or failed Brexit is absolutely buggering you up all over the place. We're taking hits already in two key areas. One is staffing, and then the other is finances.
Yeah.
So in terms of staffing, this is most clearly seen in EU nurses. From 2013 to 2016, our number of nurses overall in the country increased by 19,000. The proportion of those that came from the EU was 21,000. That means if they hadn't come in, we would have decreased. So they plugged in that gap of 2004 and then added another 19,000. So provided all of the growth. Now since 2016, the number of EU nurses has dropped off. So it's not just that they're not coming in, it's also that they're leaving. So the total number on the Nursing and Midwifery Council register, which is where they get collated, shows that it's dropping off and dragging down our overall number of nurses overall when we're seeing all these vacancies open up. So we're going in the wrong direction, and that's very dangerous, because if you have a nurse to patient ratio that's really stretched, then that's bad for patient safety. So that's the stuff.
Are British people going to die because of Brexit?
Anything to do with the NHS has life and death consequences.
I know.
So I don't want to be over dramatic.
Are British people going to die because of Brexit? If we have 108,000 vacancies in the EU, and tell me what 12,000 of them are doctors?
There will be a higher rate of avoidable error. So yes.
Avoidable error, that means death.
Yeah, but anything to do with the NHS and health has that associated with it. So
don't get ill in the next 2 years,
So
guys.
I always resent it when pharma companies say, if we don't get our way, then we can't be as efficient, and this means people will die. I think that's overdramatic, because you have to step back and look at the system, but as the system gets weaker, that does put us all into more jeopardy, yes.
Can you say it now about us leaving the EU without a deal, because that's what Theresa May seems to want to do at the moment?
For sure. No, that's super dangerous.
Will people die?
And if you've got people who have rare diseases, if you've got people who've got chronic diseases, if you've got people who are elderly and need a lot of care, they are in more jeopardy of expiring earlier. Yeah.
I'm not beholden to the same rules as Mike here. I'm just going to say people are going to die. Those old people that like maybe your parents or your grandparents. Yeah. They need their medicines. It's going to be a lot harder for them to get their medicines. It's going to be a lot harder for them to see a specialist or to have a nurse take care of them. It is. I mean, I can't say for definite that they're going to die because of that, because maybe they might be one of the lucky few who gets someone to look after them and someone to diagnose them and the medicines through to cure them of whatever they have. But the way things are going at the moment...
It changes their odds, yeah. Let's put it that way. It changes their odds.
Can we just talk a little bit about medicines then?
Yes.
Finally, because I want to wrap it. It's going to be a short one, this one, because I've got to get home.
Okay.
And
I've got to get off to talk in a rally. That's why I've been drinking lemonade. We started doing this in another pub where it was really noisy behind. I had my pint there, and I thought I'm not going to do two because I need to try and stay sharp
for this
event that I'm doing in Labour conference.
But for the bloke in the street we're going to wait for this siren to go past.
No, just talk over it.
It won't work. Too noisy. Fair winds. So just to wrap up, we talked about science funding. We talked about NHS.
Yeah.
And how it's going to affect people. Do you see any way that we can leave the EU that is going to be beneficial for the people of the United Kingdom?
Beneficial, no. You can certainly minimise damage if you were to take an EFTA route and have that properly planned. Then you're minimising damage. You take, but in terms of beneficial, no. I mean, the whole point of being in the EU is that you club together resources, whether they be in research and healthcare or healthcare, and then you all benefit from that.
If Jason was here, he'll be like, he'll be talking about trade, and he'll be like, we're a big trade bloc.
Yeah,
the EU, and they're like, we're a tiny trade bloc.
So this is one of the things. There's so much emphasis on trade that a lot of other things get thrown under the bus. If you'll pardon.
This is a good point.
And so when people say we could come out of the EU and go on to WTO, it's kind of, you muppet, of all the things that we sort out through the EU, trade in goods is only one part. What about common security and defence? What about data transfer? What about scientific collaborations? What about cross-border healthcare? What about Euratom? What about flights and transport? What about citizens' rights? All of these aspects make up this web of collaboration that we have built over 40 years. And so when we come crashing out, and it is crashing out because you're breaking multiple things simultaneously, just trying to fix one thing with a high tariff barrier system of the WTO doesn't fix a damn thing. That's why it's so dangerous, because you've got all these other areas that you're neglecting when you're just talking about trade. And one of those is science, and another one of those is healthcare. And I just gave you two examples where damage is being done already, that is in the staffing, and I didn't quite get to finances because just the fallen pound adds on 900 million a year in terms of purchasing of equipment from abroad, plus another 100 million a year in terms of NHS healthcare spend on UK citizens abroad. That's damage at the moment, before you talk about the Brexit dividend being a Brexit debt, before you talk about preparing for a no-deal Brexit, which all of our hospitals have to do and spend time and effort and resources on that, before you talk about leaving Euratom and supplies of medical radioisotopes and the blockage at the borders and stockpiling for insulin and other drugs, and leaving rare diseases frameworks and the damage done to our research frameworks, before you start talking about all of those, including cross-border healthcare, including disease monitoring systems, where we have pooled all these resources to provide this healthcare framework in which the NHS sits. That's what I mean when I say Brexit attacks the NHS from all angles, because it is a multifaceted attack. And for a strained system, it just doesn't have the buffering in order to make sure it stays attacked keeps off the attack during all of that. And the threat is that it gets so weakened that it opens itself up more to privatization, which is exactly what big US corporations are waiting for. They've been waiting for years to try and find an angle to come into the UK market. A broken NHS by this multiple attack, and then a US-UK trade deal would be exactly their excuse to ride into the rescue, to fund all the right-wing think tanks that would promote reshaping the NHS, to allow them in, to help them provide solutions for us. But as they provide solution, they buy into our politics, they buy into our BBC, they set those debates, they set the spin, and then it's their funding and their narrative that guides where our healthcare system goes thereafter. It's a very, very dangerous concoction of catalysts that would make all of that happen.
Wow. That's pretty epic stuff there, Mike.
Thank you. Have you had one pint too many?
No. Well, maybe. But wow. No, I'm just this whole Brexit thing has cast cast a shadow on Britain's standing in the world.
Yeah.
In economics terms, but also, as I'm discovering, in the terms of science and medicine.
Yeah.
And whereas I think a lot of people maybe watching this video will be like, well, I'm not a scientist, why do I care about funding for science?
Yeah.
They will care, and they should care about funding for the NHS and the research that we do into medicines.
Well, with science, you want the country to be world leading in cutting edge technologies, because that's better jobs for everyone, and that's a richer country, as well as our pride.
Yeah.
So that's us step down from leading up that team. But then with the NHS, it is not just that you're hurting the soul of the country and your quality of healthcare provision yourself. There is something more fundamental associated with Brexit, and that's that Brexit is just a mask. The mask has slipped, and the vision of those that have led Brexit is a very neoliberal vision, which included trashing workers' rights, trashing environmental rights, and opening up the NHS to privatisation. That is something that they have never been able to sell to the British public, but actually going through Brexit and all the we demand our freedom and we demand our sovereignty helps force the country into that place where our backs are against the wall, the EU is our enemy, the economy is in turmoil, and the only way out is to deregulate, and then at that point they get what they want. And this has been a deliberate plan by some of them since the very start of this whole Brexit endeavour. And the mask is now slipping. It's becoming clearer to people in Labour and in the Labour conference, which I'm just going to go to, that is the case, and that is why we have to turn around this quickly. Because it was never about Brexit and our freedom and sovereignty. It was about those rich guys that wanted a neoliberal vision, being able to shake up the country and do it as they please, and have fun with it and reshape it and remold it. It's a plaything of the rich elite that love the neoliberal idea as peddled by Jacob Rees-Mogg's father,
who wrote a book called Blood in the Streets about how to make money
and
out
the sovereign individual.
How to make money out of an economic disaster.
Yeah.
Jacob Rees-Mogg's father.
Yeah. Sir William Rees-Mogg.
If people are watching this and they voted for Brexit and they're really behind the whole ideal now.
Yeah.
What do you think the psychology is behind that? That they're watching this and they think that we're funded by George Soros and that we're just saying these things because someone's giving us money to say these things. Like what? Well, the psychological point of view.
We've got no financial gain to be had from this. I know I don't. I mean, I sort of gave up the science thing to do the campaiging because
we've done really well on our GoFundMe, but it's not covering it's still not covering my credit card bills.
No, people don't fight this hard for something if they don't believe in it, and the same goes for some of the Brexiteers. They do believe in what they're doing. Some of them think it's for the benefit of the country. In fact, most do. There are others that just see their own, personal gain in it. And they believe in it. It's a clash of visions. But Brexit, as it was sold in 2016, was meant to be about the people. Yeah. It's not about the people anymore. It's about notions of nationhood and sovereignty and keeping out the immigrants, but also increasingly the neoliberal disaster capitalist thing. That's the aspect of it that is surviving, and the people that are driving this forward. And I don't have any issue whatsoever with people who think, right, the EU was getting a bit bureaucratic, it was a bit distant from me, I want more direct democracy. Yeah. I was on board with all of that. Some of the first academic papers I did were actually active criticism of the EU science programme before they actually took on board what I was saying or just came to the same conclusions.
Isn't this the
and
message
shaped
that
it
we
up.
want, though? If we want to change the EU to make
stay
it better,
inside.
because
Yeah.
I don't think it's perfect either, and I hope that these videos that we're making, we make this really clear. I don't think that the EU is wonderful. I don't think it's like perfect. I think there's things that it could improve on, but we can't improve on them unless we're part of the gang.
Yeah, and when you are in, you can improve on them, because I was writing those papers about how the EU science programme was functioning, and I was talking to people in the Commission about it, and then these things exactly happened in Horizon 2020. You can make a difference. And when you think about something like the European Research Council grant, that was forged by Brits in 2007. When you think about the animal rights legislation that was copy-pasted all over the EU, that was copy-pasted from UK standards. So we have been driving a whole load of standards through the whole market and through the whole environment that we operate in, so that poor animal welfare conditions couldn't undercut some of the things that we were doing.
Yeah.
So when you cut yourself out and you say you get sovereignty, no, it's just sovereignty shrinkage. You have more of a say over a smaller environment, but all of your businesses and citizens and civil society that tries to operate in your continent, their routes to power are cut off. Their sovereignty is shrunken back. That is not Britain to me. That is not Britain to me. You know, we have always been leading, and if you want to lead, you need to get with the team and get in front. Not go to the back and say they're all treating me meanly and they're all a dictator. That's not what a leader does.
Exactly.
So that's how it offends me as a Brit. People should take this victim narrative that now you see with Theresa May, you know.
They're picking on me.
They're treated so badly.
They're picking on me.
You know,
5th biggest economy in the world, and they're picking on us.
We hold all the cards. They have to do this with us. We have them over a barrel to look at what victims we are.
Yeah.
That's pathetic. That is not British.
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. So I want us to be Brits. I want us to be back in. I want to boot this thing into the long grass, and I want the world to see that we boot this into the long grass, and I want the world to see this is what you do when populism tries to overtake your country on completely BS. This is how you fix it. You raise up the people through networks and communities, like all of our regional groups, like our national campaigns. You work damn hard off crowdfunders to make the change, to get the education out. You work together, and then you put that pressure on politicians, and that's how you overturn something that people say you can't overturn, you're not allowed to. Yes, we can, because we've exposed it for the BS that it is. It isn't going to deliver anything that it promised. Even those that do want Brexit, fine, okay, come back in 5-10 years, now that you've had your learning, pretty please with a plan next time, with a plan.
We had no plan.
We had no plan.
We just flung ourselves at the tide
of Nigel Farage. 20 years he was saying, let's rob the bank, let's rob the bank, let's rob the bank. So then everyone finally says, yeah, let's rob the bank. They turn up outside the bank with no tools and no plan and no schemes. Okay. During the referendum debate, you know, where was the plan? Where was the plan? There was no plan. Theresa May, she's going to invoke Article 50. With what plan? There is no plan. We'll come up with a plan.
There was no plan.
So there was no plan. There was
there hasn't been a plan for 2 years.
Chequers.
There hasn't been a plan for 2 years.
And it's like, checkers, boom. And then the ERG says, we're not having checkers, chuck checkers. We've got an alternative plan.
We're not having checkers.
They said we've got an alternative plan.
We can't show you it.
And then they shelve it. They shelve it before it goes out. And like, they've had all this time and they have no plan. So after they strip off the Lexiteers, after they strip off the Ramonas in government, and when it's just the purists themselves who say, right, what is it that we really want? Is Tory neoliberal purists from Brexit? What is it? They can't even then agree on a plan. That's nuts. That's why Brexit is fundamentally broken in the current form that it is. If you wanted to do Brexit, you could have done an EFTA. And then you reshape your position in the single market, you lose some powers, you gain some powers. Could have been interesting. Could have done some creative things with it. But they blew that because they were just
inept.
Yeah.
And if Brexit doesn't happen, it's not our fault. We've set out from the beginning that we're against it and we don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
But it could have happened if the Conservative Party were in any way competent. But they haven't been. They have allowed the last 2 years to run around arguing amongst themselves, having a general election, which then resulted in them losing their majority and being
beholden to the DUP by the cojones, and now they can't do anything.
Yeah, which made one of the most difficult parts of the withdrawal agreement, which is what we're going to do about the Northern Irish border, even harder.
Yep.
The way it was described to us when we were in Brussels last week was Britain is the hardest country to take out the EU. If Luxembourg wanted to leave, everyone would go, okay then, and kind of shrug. There's nothing that much to do with it. It's you set up your barriers around your country, and then you set your own trade quotas or whatever. But Britain has a very unique circumstance where we have this border with Ireland. Yeah. And that makes it more complex than anybody else trying to do this. But also, at the same time, Britain was leading Europe in so many different parts.
So many
this
different was aspects. Our team.
We were on a course to overtake Germany in terms of our economy in 2016 until the vote. Yeah. Until the Brexit vote. Yeah. And then we literally just smashed ourselves in our own bollocks with a cricket bat. And we're continuing to do that. Yeah.
It's a sad situation, but if we've gotten a lot of learning out of all this process, and the rest of Europe has gotten a lot of learning, so always think about it positively. The key thing now is how you fight back against the BS and against the hijack, and how you build a path out. So like you were saying, it's not the Remainers' fault, it's the Brexiteers themselves have been fighting like a ferret in a sack. We've been on the sidelines and just saying, right, if it does all go to the wall, like it's looking, how do you build a path out to rescue the nation from this stupidity? It didn't have to be stupidity, but it is. And if the government's failed, then you just have to call it for what it is and build a path out. And through a people's vote is the right way to do it. Yeah. And that's that. Yeah.